Testing, testing. I think we're live. This is the first time I'm doing this. I'm also simultaneously looking at my iPad. Yes. I think this is going well. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. For those who don't know me, my name is Henrike and I make comics, I make webcomics, and I teach about comics. So this is my first live stream on YouTube as well. First, I don't know how long this live stream is going to be. It might be around an hour, it might be shorter. I have no idea. I've written down some questions that I got over the course of doing videos weekly. Ever since January, I started doing weekly videos, make a point of showing up every single week on the YouTube channel and talk about comics, talk about how to start your comics, talk about the process. So yeah, here we are, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about getting started with webcomics because I've noticed that getting started is sometimes the hardest part. I mean, don't get me wrong, webcomics can be a very elaborate thing. It can take out years of your life, but it's so much fun when you finally start. You will learn so much, you will grow so much as an artist. I truly believe that comics are some of the best ways for you to improve yourself as an artist. So yeah, definitely get started with webcomics, but then the getting started part is often where people kind of struggle because they want to do things right the first time, they want to do things perfectly, and that can really hold you back. And that has been the case for me. I have been art blocked for a very long time for the simple fact when it boils down to it, I was very insecure about starting my comic because I was unsure if I was going to fail at it, and that's why I didn't start. But you know, now that I have my webcomic, now that I have started my webcomic, I'm so glad it's finally over with. Like the whole doubting, it's like it's not a question anymore. I'm doing it now. So that's why I want to encourage you today with this live stream and encourage you to start your comic as well. And I hope to dive in a little bit deeper about what exactly it looks like and the things you can kind of prepare in advance so you have the best possible chance of not having to redo a ton of stuff later, which is always kind of a pain. But sometimes it's unavoidable. Like sometimes you learn from your mistakes. You usually do them once and then never again. But if I can help you not make those mistakes at first, then I will definitely do that. First, I have a little kind of like more of a maintenance thing going on. There have been people doing some drilling and hammering into the wall today. It's been going on the entire day. I've been on multiple floors of my apartment building and I cannot figure out where it's coming from. When they will start drilling, I will probably have a jump scare and it will be loud, just so you know. So if it happens, I'm very, very sorry. I've tried to do something about it, but I really couldn't. So please bear with me. I have a Photoshop document open, so if it goes worse, usually it doesn't take too long, but if it gets really bad, I can always just start a drawing. That said, I am very bad at drawing and talking at the same time. So I will probably not do much drawing, I will do mostly talking, but you know, if I need to explain something, I can do that. If you have any questions during this live stream and you're tuned in live, I will keep an eye on my chat. Let me do that right now to see if you guys can hear me. Really bad echo. Maybe you can wear earbuds. I will go check real fast if I can plug in my headphones. I really hope that that helps. I'm not quite sure because I do have a microphone, so if the microphone is picking up a weird echo, then that could be a problem. But I will try it with headphones. I'll be back shortly. this helping? Let me know if it clears up. Also, let me know if this is totally messing up the sound. Thanks so much for tuning in. Well, is it Jess is here? Hello. That is awesome. And we also have I Am Glitter Girl. I've seen you somewhere before. Was it on Instagram? I remember seeing your username before. Your name is Anusha? I'm apologizing in advance if I mispronounce any of your names. But thanks so much for tuning in live, guys. It's so awesome. That's great. Cool. So if you have any questions during this live stream, please let me know. Post them in the chat. If I will remember, I will look at my chat that I have here on my iPad, and I will answer your questions. So, first of all, one of my most watched videos is about getting started with webcomics, and I think that is because it's very hard to start something that you've never done before. And when it comes to webcomics, we see these finished, published things on the internet, and it can be really this mystery of like, how do you even start something like that, and how do you then publish it, and all of that stuff. So my first tip, definitely, to everybody is take it step by step, make it super simple for yourself. So if you're just starting out, do shorter comics. Cannot stress this enough. Start out with some short comics if you've never made comics before. To get some inspiration for short stories, you can look up short fairy tales online, or other short comics, or even animated shorts, that kind of stuff, to get you kind of in a mindset of like, how can I tell a story really simple, really small, and you could even make a test comic based on some small story. Obviously, if something is in the public domain still, that means that I think something has to be created over 70 years ago, and then it becomes outside of the public. Then it becomes public domain. I always get that mixed up. Then it becomes public domain, which means that the copyright has expired, which means you can, without any rectifications, you can take that story and do something yourself with it. And an example of that is fairy tales, because usually they've been written a long while ago. One of the things I see happen a lot is taking a fairy tale, pouring out a completely different style and genre on top of it, and then make something real cool out of it. Like an example could be Little Mermaid in space. You can make space mermaids, and you can set that entire story in space. Maybe apply some of the science fiction tropes onto that. That could be super fun. And you can do that with short stories. Like, find short stories inside of the public domain, and that way you can do with it whatever you want. So that could be a really great way to practice doing some short comics, and then see, there it is. There's the drilling. I'm very sorry, guys. I hope you can still hear me. Because I have my headphones on, it's actually better for me now, and I didn't scare as much. I've had so many jump scares today. Where was that? Yeah, so short comics are a great way to get started. And then you don't necessarily have to worry about, I need to make a website and I have to put it somewhere. Even with a short comic, you can just go on Webtoons, and you can just make it a few episodes, and you can get started on publishing your comics really easily that way. And I will dive more into Webtoons later on. Let me check the chat to see if the sound is better. I really hope it is. So bad. Usually there's an echo problem. I'm so sorry. I hope the echo isn't too bad. It could be something in my program that I'm using, actually. sound goes on my iPad so that I don't hear this. I do have 2 bars of sound going on. I have like a mic and an audio input capture. Maybe I have 2 mics on at the same time. The problem is I can see that the stream is kind of behind. So it will take a while to see, but I'm going to switch off one of the mics, and I hope I switch off the right one. Maybe this fixes it? Please let me know in the chat if the sound's fixed now. This is my first time doing live stream, guys. I'm so sorry. First, wait for a bit to see if the sound is fixed. Let me know if the sound is fixed. Or if I killed the sound entirely. Okay. Then I hope it's not too disturbing to have an echo. Yeah, I'm going to figure it out. It's also a video capture device. Maybe it's also picking it up from the camera. This is so confusing. It might, I'm actually pretty sure it's capturing sound from multiple sources. This should really do it, I think. Sound's not fixed yet. Okay. I switched off another sound thing. I think we're still good. If not, if the sound is dead, please let me know. That will start getting to your questions. Let's see. Hi, Diana. Hello from the UK. That's awesome. Hi to you. Thank you for joining. Yes. Okay, so there was one question I'm gonna add to my list of questions, and that was from Jess. Do you have any advice on how to not let it spiral out of control? My small, short, simple stories always spiral out of control. Yes, definitely. My comic Recollection City started with a simple character design assignment for myself. That was it. Just redesign some of my old stuffed animals and turn it into an entire cast of characters, an entire story that's going to span multiple chapters, multiple hundreds of pages. So I 100% get what you mean. The biggest tip I have for not letting stuff spiral out of control is to really work in advance on keeping your story as tight as possible, and the biggest asset you have in that is having a clear idea of what you're saying with your story and what you want to tell, and then have a very clear protagonist who is like the person who personifies that message or that struggle, that thing you're exploring, and then every single character that you have and every single plot point that you have and everything hangs on that one idea. And if it's something that's not supporting that one idea, technically you can cut it. And I know cutting stuff is really hard, but that's where side stories and sequels and small little sketchy comics are the best because you can still take your story later and expand a little bit on it, make bonus comics for your Patreons, that kind of stuff. But at the beginning, when you're still in the story phase, have your story, and I write my stories out in bullet points. So I have a list of bullet points that's all of my scenes, and I I go into there and I just look with every single thing. I'm like, is this what I want to be saying, or am I sidetracking? And then where you can, cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. Because my experience is too that your bullet points, if you're going to take them into actual drawing and thumbnails and scenes, they're going to expand anyway. It's always easier to expand a comic. And that's my biggest tip in general. Cut, keep simple, make it as small as possible, and that counts for everything. It counts for story. It also counts for your character designs. It counts for your backgrounds. It counts for, extra stuff happening in your scenes that you don't necessarily need. Always be aware, because comics are so elaborate, always be aware of saying it in the least amount of effort. I would almost say possible, and that sounds really lazy, but with comics, it's not. It's a comic page or even a comic panel is not the same thing as an illustration. A single illustration, you can take a few weeks, it's all fine. But a comic, you just need to build up some speed, because otherwise it's going to take forever. And simplifying and getting better at being real simple with everything is hard, but it's also one of the best things you can do while making your comic. I'm getting a little bit distracted because I'm realizing that I haven't checked if I actually killed the sound, so I'm going to do that right now. Okay, much better. Ooh, that goes gone. Yes, it was picking it up from both my mic and my camera. I'm so happy. That's awesome. Thanks so much for keeping track of that, guys. Let's see if I missed any questions. I am Glitter Girl. I did say your name. You might have missed it at the beginning. Also, it's hard to keep track of the entire chat and also answer the questions. So if I might miss something, just post it again. Diana asks, let's see, the chat just refreshed and your comment was gone. Oh, your comment is gone. I don't know what happened, but it says that your comment has been deleted, Diana. So if you want to rephrase the question, please can you put it in the chat again? Yes, time to go back in and see what I can leave on the cutting floor. Definitely. I know it's hard. It's really hard. But if you're like working with a scene and you're thumbnailing and stuff, and you figure that you still need something that you cut, you can always put it back in. But at first, just cut as much as you can. Anusha made us a new comic based on a school version. A school version of what? That sounds awesome. Did you make a comic about school? Diana has a question. Did you know your whole story before you start Recollection City, or did the characters take it on as they went along? The thing with story is that things kind of form both when you're writing it, but also when you're drawing it, it takes on a completely different dimension. So I did have the main plot in my head for Recollection City, and I made sure that I had all the basics and all of the most necessary scenes that I had those before I even started working on the first page. And that doesn't have to take very long. You don't have to write out the entire story. That's something I don't recommend in general. I used to do that was when I was younger. I would write out the entire story in novel form. It works for some people because they can get really into the characters and they can really make the characters come alive in that way. For me, it just took a really long time because then I get focused on writing, which is not something that you're going to see in a comic anyway. So for me, it wasn't that productive. What I have done for certain scenes is kind of draw it out really fast in some sort of more like a storyboarding process thing. Not paying attention to composition, not paying attention to, character design, just using stick figures, but getting kind of a feeling of what the characters are doing, where they are, kind of how they relate to each other in a visual form sometimes really helps me. But keep that really simple because that can get overboard as well. Writing is still faster. So I do recommend actually to have at least the basic structure of your story from beginning to end, at least in bullet points on paper, so you know where you're going. And it's also fun because you can kind of tease things already. I do that a ton. Like, you don't see it now, but if you're further in my comic and you read back, you will actually see a lot of things that I already kind of dropped in the first chapter that are going to come into play later. That's a good that's an advantage of already knowing where you're going and already knowing how every single character is going to end up, because then you can put them in a place where they can experience the most growth as well. So yeah, I did have, before I started the first page, I did have the basics of the story. The specifics of the scenes is something I figure out when I start a new scene. So then I take the bullet of the story that I'm working on then, and then I expand that bullet in more bullets. That is like my scene description. And scene usually has like a build up, it has conflict in it, and then there's some sort of resolution, new decision that brings the characters forward, and that's what I write out in the bullet points. And then I dive into stuff like thumbnailing and such, and then that's where I get more specific. And that is also where I found that you constantly learn more about your characters. I think the period where they became the most fleshed out for me was when I started writing out more scenes and kind of figuring out more of the plot and writing about their motivations and stuff. And then sometimes it's fun to write a few scenes already, kind of like, what are they going to say? So you can kind of get to know them a little bit, get to know their character. At first, it can be very analytical and very like, well, this is it, this needs to happen, and I'm talking about this in the scene, and then we need that information. But then when you get into thumbnailing, I think that's where they, like, when you actually start working with scenes and actual dialogue and such, is where they became the most alive for me, I think. Anusha is asking for drawing tips. Yes, I can. The biggest tip on drawing I can give you is focusing on the basics. And one of the most important things about those basics is composition, which is how you draw your comics. And I've noticed, especially when I was younger, that I did a lot of things right already on intuition. And that's because I consumed a ton of comics and a ton of animated series and movies and that kind of stuff. And that really gives you a feeling of like an intuitional feeling already of like camera angles, and then now I need a close-up, and now I need like a more of a landscape or an interior, because we need to see where the characters are. So pay attention when you're consuming media to what other people are doing and why. Like, why do they use a close-up? Why do they use like wide camera lenses, or why are they putting the camera above the characters or below the characters. That's a really good way to learn. And then basics, meaning composition, meaning actually learning how to draw. And that comes from observing and seeing the shapes underneath something. For example, this is a rectangle, but then you have something more complex. This consists of a circle with, other circles. Gumi is very like round. These are all very round shapes. So kind of look at shapes and stuff, and look at channels like Proco on YouTube, and he does a lot of anatomy, like human anatomy things, and can help you figure out what to look for when you're drawing. Because, for example, if you draw faces, it's good that you have some knowledge about how the skull works and how the muscles work. And then you have things like perspective and color, and those are kind of the basic skills in art. And that's something that you will always need to work on. That never stops. I'm doing a course on color right now because I really I wanna make my color like pop. So never stop learning. Figure out who are the artists you look up to, and do they have tutorials on their website. Find some really, really great artists to follow and see what they're doing on their YouTube channels, or on Twitter. Sometimes a lot of artists post tutorials and, show you how they drew something and how they build up their drawings. So that's the best tip I can give you. And never stop practicing, never stop drawing. And eventually you will learn. Over time, you will get better, and put in some work every day if you still can, or every week, to practice your drawing. Because when it comes to comics, what I sometimes miss is I'm so focused on getting out these drawings, and you're just focused on making a good image, that you're not necessarily studying. So while a comic is one of the things that will make you grow as an artist in general, it's still good to dive in sometimes. Just maybe even take one of your pages and kind of tear it apart, see where you can improve, critique yourself, look at things you might want to improve on, and find specific courses or tutorials and stuff on those things. Usually I have kind of like a wish list of things I want to improve on, because those are the things that I keep running into when drawing my comic. It would be like, it would be so much easier and faster if I was better at blank. So I have a list of things that I want to improve in my comic. It's just a challenge of finding the time sometimes, between doing this YouTube channel, doing comics, doing work, and all of that stuff. So that's a challenge sometimes. There's questions coming in. It's really great. I had questions on my screen, and I don't even have to, talk about them. I hope this is still valid for like the starting with comics thing, starting with webcomics thing. I think it is, because, one of the reasons I waited so long with my webcomic was because I actually did an attempt at making a webcomic when I was younger. I started that, I think, around 15, 16 years old. And then I just got stuck at one point because my drawings weren't that good yet. And I really felt like I needed more skill, and I didn't know, because I'm a self-taught artist, I had a hard time figuring out how to study, and I had a hard time figuring out how to improve my art. So that really intimidated me, and I was like, I cannot make a comic. The comic that I have in my head, I cannot make that. So that held me back for a long time, even when I would improve. And even now, I sometimes have ideas for scenes that are coming up, and I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to do this. The difference between then and, in my 20s, slipping into art block, and now, is that I actually know how to study now. And when I don't know how to draw something, that's also a very big drawing tip. Use reference material. If you're gonna design a dress, find multiple images of dresses, do some studies, figure out what you like about certain dresses and combine certain elements of it. Really try and figure out how the dress works, and then design a dress that you want for your comic. Copying things is kind of sketchy because every single photo is copyrighted as well, just like our art is. And even if you turn into something else, not literally using the photo, but you're turning it into a drawing, it's still best to kind of figure out how something works based on the reference and then coming up with your own stuff. That said, just make use of things. Like if you know how to use 3D software, or you have, you can purchase or download for free, I think, too, in Google Warehouse. I think you can just download a basic room, and then you can use that to turn it into a room that you want. Use those shortcuts because comics are an elaborate thing, and sometimes you don't need to make it harder for yourself than it has to be. So I definitely recommend using all tools that are at your disposal, and one of those tools is definitely using reference. I have Pinterest boards that are gigantic, and another frustrating thing about comics sometimes is I'm not an animation studio. I don't have people who research things for me, design things for me, and then we're all gonna come together and combine it into this giant, beautiful movie. You have to do everything by yourself. You only have so much time. So sometimes I wish I could really dive in and design the things, really design them, but it's not like I'm a concept artist or a character designer, and designing things is my work. I also, next to the designing, I also have to do the writing, do the layout and the thumbnails, and do color and do the inking and the drawing. So planning is a thing. And sometimes really hard to just be like, I need to continue, I need to just move on now and just go. So yeah, being smart with using reference, doing a few iterations, design it, and be like, it's good enough. This is what I need. This is what I need to convey. And design, put the most effort into the most important things, like your main characters, but don't go designing a character like in super detail for super long, for a character that only appears in one scene, and has a few lines of dialogue. Really divide your time according to what's most important as well. You can design this really beautiful room, and if that room is only seen once, you can maybe go a little bit all out with it. But if you have to draw it 20, 30, 50 times, then you might actually want to tone it down a bit so you don't have to draw 20 million things all the time. Keep your backgrounds really, really simple. Everything, especially if you're starting out and you're overwhelmed, everything you can do to reduce that overwhelm in the beginning is the best. Come up with a simple style for a comic. I have seen some painted comics, people who paint everything. I'm in awe. I don't know how to do that. I'm still trying to simplify my style, especially my coloring style, but also I don't use that much line weight in my inks anymore. I don't do the very thick, very thin lines anymore. It's so much work, and it can just add up like half an hour to every page. And 5 pages, that's already 2.5 hours extra. So whenever you can cut something, cut it. And, it takes skill to make something simple look real good. And that is something I'm still working on, but something I'm getting better at, and it saves you so much time. So that's a big tip. Questions? Let me check if there's some more questions. Balance between getting the main plot points down, knowing where you're going, letting the characters carry stories. Yes, definitely. That's exactly how it is. Getting the characters to be where they can experience the most growth. Yes. The story has a plot, and that is something that you're getting across. But one of the biggest things that people run from a story is they want to see the transformation. They want to see the change that your character undergoes, because that inner journey that your characters go on is sometimes even more exciting than the plot. If you have a good plot and a good, character development and stuff, and you have that perfect mix, then you have a gold mine, I think. Yeah, ideally, you want every single scene to carry your story a little bit forward and carry your characters a little bit forward. In very extreme terms, some people even say your character should not be the same at the end of a scene as they are in the beginning. And I'm still learning to do that better myself. But just keep thinking about going forward with the plot, ramp up the stakes even more. How can you deepen the conflict for your characters even more? And what is, especially if you know where you want your character to end up, what is the place they start that is the space for the most growth? What are their biggest fears? What do they absolutely do not want to do, and just force them into those situations? Those kind of things that really resonates with people. We want to see people overcome odds, because it gives us hope that that could be us as well. And sometimes living through the life of a character, it can really teach us something, or it can really, give us an experience almost without us having to go through it ourselves. And that's the great thing about story. That's why story can even be transformational and can really help people. Yeah. So that's awesome. I love story. I love stories much. The sun is also starting to shine on me. Might have to do something about that, because that looks real weird on camera. Manusha, you actually bring up a really, really great point about the character growth that I just mentioned, because you mentioned that you have a character who is a nerd at school. By the way, nerds unite. Nerds are the best. And then they get bullied, and they eventually turn into a popular person, or a famous singer. I love that. That can really be about passion. If they have a passion for singing, and you mentioned they are kind of nerdy, but if you want your character to become a famous singer in the end, what is the place where they start from that will be the biggest change in the end? Like, it's such a cool moment when you get to the end of the story and you see a character and you see them succeed, and you're just so happy for them because you know where they came from. And getting on a stage and singing when you've been bullied is incredibly hard. So they have overcome great odds to get where they are, and that is a really great. That sounds like a really great character arc. I think you have a great story there. Just as a question, how do you know what to do for the middle? I know my beginning. I have a pretty clear idea of where it's going to end, but the middle has me stumped. Oh, I know that problem. I know the problem a lot. The middle is the hardest part of any story, usually for everybody. Let me gather my thoughts, and meanwhile, because I'm getting super distracted, because I'm like, my arm is heating up because of the sun. It's kind of burning me. So I'm gonna shut up the curtains and hope it doesn't kill my lighting. And I will answer your question, or at least try to give you some tips. Nope, too light. I think we're still good. It looks a little different, but the sun is at this weird point where it's right in the middle of my house. And I really can't escape from it unless I sit behind a closet or something. Yes, so the middle part of the story, I know from experience, it's a tough one. That is where your character needs to grow, and all your characters need to grow, and where you throw obstacle after obstacle in their face. And sometimes they fail, sometimes they succeed in overcoming, their obstacles. And usually them overcoming their obstacles have to do also with the thing you're saying in your story. This is called theme. Theme is kind of like in one sentence, the thing you're saying with your story. A very well-known example is The Wizard of Oz. Like the key sentence that Dorothy keeps repeating is, "There's no place like home." That's actually not the theme of The Wizard of Oz, because all throughout the story you see these characters who want something. Like Dorothy wants, in the beginning she thinks she wants adventure, and then that when she comes to Oz, it turns into she just wants to get home. And then you have the Scarecrow, you have the Lion, you have the Tin Man, and they all want something. But in the end, they figure out that what they wanted was with them all along. What they wanted, they have all along. And they figure out, let me rephrase that. The theme of Wizard of Oz is you might already have what you're looking for. And in the case of Dorothy, she already had what she was looking for. She was looking for friends, for... especially I think she was looking for love, for friendship and stuff, and she already had that at home. And then obviously the Tin Man, he already had a heart, and the Lion already had courage, and the Scarecrow was smart because he came up with ideas and stuff. But it's just seeing what you have is the theme of The Wizard of Oz, and it's the same for your story. If you know what you want to say, if you know what the core idea behind your story is, then you already know where your character starts, where they're going to end up, but you also have ways of getting the character from where they are to where they need to be. You can throw obstacles in their way that relate to your theme, that kind of challenges the belief that they have at the beginning. Usually they believe some kind of lie about the truth that you're telling in your story. For example, you might already have what you want, like in The Wizard of Oz. They all believe they don't have it. That's a lie that they believe in the beginning. And then all of that stuff, it gets challenged. Dorothy wants to get home, but every single time they get somewhere, she feels like she's farther from home than ever. So how can you put obstacles in the way of your character in the middle part? And you usually have some characters interacting with each other and stuff. That can be really helpful. You need to develop some character relationships and all of the stuff. You have some plot to go through. Your characters need to make discoveries, or all that kind of stuff. But in the middle, what can actually really be helpful to really nail this down is in the middle there's usually the midpoint. And the midpoint is something that happens in your story that flips it all upside down again. It can actually give your characters a false sense of victory. A good example of a great midpoint, for example, is the Disney movie Tarzan, where the midpoint of the movie is where Tarzan meets Jane and the other humans. So the first half of Tarzan is him, trying to fit in with his family and trying to become the best gorilla there ever was. And he succeeds, actually. He almost gets what he wants, which is the acceptance of his adoptive father, Kerchak. He almost gets it because right before the midpoint, he kills is it a leopard? I think it's a leopard, Sabor. He kills the leopard, and then there's this great moment where Kerchak's like, oh great, now he's going to become the leader of the family, and you see Kerchak kind of turning away. Then Tarzan brings Sabor, the killed leopard, and lays it at the feet of Kerchak, and Kerchak has this moment of, oh, maybe I've been really harsh on him. And Tarzan's like, oh my goodness, he's going to accept me. And then we hear a gunshot, and that changes everything, because the humans are coming, which brings an entirely new obstacle in front of Tarzan, because now he figures out, like, he wanted to become a gorilla, but now he's figured out, hey, there's actual creatures that look like me. And then, now who am I, and where do I want to belong? So that really flips it on its edge again. So if you can find something that either your characters are going to feel defeated by, but it gives them some new drive, or the character has this really great moment and then it turns out not to be that great. You see that in a lot of I think that was in Mean Girls as well, where, you know, in Midpoint, maybe, I don't know if that was Mean Girls, but let's say you have this story about high school girls, and this girl's trying to fit in real bad, and then in the Midpoint, they actually are accepted into a group of friends. I think it's been so long since I've seen Mean Girl, but I think that's the main point. And then she starts seeing that it's actually not, they're not two great friends together, and she kind of starts losing herself and kind of needs to figure out, and that has to do with the theme as well, like, what does your character need to learn, and can you make it super complicated for them at the midpoint, especially, to figure that out. You know, sometimes the character will start to come believe the truth, come to believe your theme, and then it's just a struggle of getting there, and sometimes the character falls into the trap of thinking they want something, and actually that's not what they need at all, and they actually need to figure out your theme, they need to figure out the truth, and that's something that they're gonna figure out in Act 3. I hope that was helpful in any way. The midpoint is your most important asset when it comes to the middle, because it is your Act 2. It's like you have your Act 1, you have your Act 3, and the midpoint is your Act 2, and the middle is your Act 2, and the midpoint is the exact middle of that. So you can work towards your midpoint, and then you can have a reaction after the midpoint, and that can lead up to what is called the all is lost moment, which is the last moment before your character goes through this valley of drama, and then they come out of it and go into Act 3 to have the final battle, actually, with your theme. It's the final, I've heard it described as it is the most dramatic expression of your theme, and it can even be a physical battle, but it can also be a really emotional moment for your character, where they actually, you know, in the case of sorry, I forgot your name again. Is it Danusha? Anusha. In the case of Danusha's story, the Act 3, like the figuring out the theme, like the character finally grasping the truth and going for it. It's like, for a girl that's bullied to go on stage, it's probably something to do with going on a stage and actually singing. You know, that's a very emotional inner struggle. And then, you know, we want to see that. We want to see that final showdown. And the middle is the hardest part of your story, I agree. But if you can still keep the tension and build it up slowly, when it comes to story, I actually recommend 2 books that were really helpful for me, which are Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald and Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. Those 2 books have changed the way I think about story. But there's also this really great free website, and helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. If somebody could type it in the chat, that would be really great. But that's a really, really awesome website. And that one helps as well a lot. It's a ton of blogs. that all really, really dive into story. Every single story method, every single person who writes about story comes at it from a few different angles. And I just recommend Frankensteining your own kind of method. And I use a multitude of methods in multiple times. And when I get stuck, I just sometimes grab one of the methods again, and if that doesn't work, I try something else, and I just keep experimenting and keep writing and doing mind maps and all of that stuff until I figure it out. See if there's any more questions. Oh yeah, thank you for posting that. Yeah, it's Proko. Just Proko. If you type that into YouTube, you will find it. It's a good channel. I have so many resources. Speaking of resources, I have a ton of resources actually on my website. If you go to pencilsandstories.com/resources, there's a ton of free, also paid, but mostly free resources that have really helped me with everything, like story, artwork, improving my art, comics, making comics, starting with comics. There's a lot of books in there that are not free, but there's also YouTube channels in there and some websites that have free stuff. So definitely pencilsandstories.com/resources is a good place to figure that out. Do you have tips for building a weakness in your main character? Do you mean weakness as in how they need to be growing? Because if you start your story, and I usually start my stories with characters, usually I have ideas for characters, and then I get to what I actually want to say. I know some people start with theme, some people start with a world. You can have multiple starting points for your story, but when it comes to characters, if you start out with a character, I would go really fast into figuring out what you actually, where you want the character to end up, what you want a character to learn, and then you can adjust their weaknesses to that. For example, in my story, my character, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without spoiling things. My character struggles with being a leader while feeling really insecure. Like, what is the worst thing for a leader to have? And it is, I think, you can figure out multiple things. Like, a weakness for a leader can also be like very misguided sense of inflated self. That could be a really big obstacle, which would make for a completely different main character. Sometimes you can have stories where your character is actually a jerk in the beginning. There's a ton of movies that have characters be complete jerks at the beginning, and they usually need to learn, to feel for other characters, feel for others, and or maybe even learn some humility and stuff. But in my case, my character, he has been destined. He's been born to be a leader. He's a son of leaders, and he has been struggling with this thing of like, but I'm not. He doesn't feel secure in public speaking. He really likes working with his hands, doing practical stuff. He doesn't like to be in spotlight. So what makes a great leader, and what insecurities would fit the best so that the character has the biggest challenge to overcome? If you go back to the stage, to the bullied girl, they need to get up on a stage. So what is the biggest weakness that your character could have that makes it super hard for them to go on stage? You can even put some irony in there. I think have a lifeguard. I'm super bad, but I'd actually never seen Jaws, the movie Jaws about shark. I actually never seen that movie, but I think the main premise of that movie is that the main character is afraid of water, but he's actually in a position where he needs to go to the water. That's the entire thing. Sometimes they call that having put your character through their own personal hell, and that could really relate to their weakness. But even then, if you have a character who, I don't know, is a lifeguard and has an accident which makes him very afraid of water, the being afraid of water doesn't even have to be his weakness. It can actually be asking for help, being too proud to ask for help. So he just keeps himself stuck in this situation of being afraid of water, but he doesn't accept help from anybody to overcome it. But it depends on your story and what your theme is. If you kind of know where you want to go and what you kind of want to explore, then you can create a character that is the best fit. And best fit is a character who will struggle with that truth of accepting help, for example. Really make it a really proud, a lifeguard who's rescued so many people, and I cannot be weak because I have to be the person who rescues everybody, and I cannot ask for help. Kind of think of those things can really spark some good ideas for the weaknesses of your characters. And of course, throw them in the most horrible situations. That will definitely challenge all their weaknesses. Exploit them all. Definitely do that. Glad it's helpful, Jess. It's awesome. Just finished a story, but I'm scared that the main character is so driven and heroic that she doesn't change that much by the end. What could totally destroy her sense of drive and heroicness? And that's a great all is lost moment where the character literally loses everything. It's characters who think a lot of things about themselves are actually really great too. You can challenge all of that. You can bring them in situations that challenges that greatly, and then show me how heroic you are. And it's usually characters who never doubted themselves in any way. They have the biggest existential crisis in the all is lost moment of but if I'm not this, then what am I? And that can be a great moment. But it depends on what you want your character to learn. If they are really driven and heroic, is that something that you want to talk about in your story? Is that something that you want to explore? How does it relate to what you want to say? How does your character being driven and heroic, how does it help the main message of your story, to tell the main message of your story? And how can you challenge character in such a way that they actually even go beyond that and maybe learn something new, or have them be really, really challenged, and then you have a story about what is bravery, what is heroism, what makes a good hero. If you talk about being driven, what does it mean being driven? What do you need to sacrifice for that? Or even, is it worth being so driven that you lose blank? It really depends on the core of your story. I would kind of go in that direction, but if you have a brave, heroic character who's very driven, maybe they need to run into a situation where that will be super challenged. And that can either be the catalyst, the stuff that happens at the beginning of your story. So your character starts out really heroic and driven, and then something happens that, like, you know, they get chronically ill. They have to learn to deal with that. You know, all of their drive. What are they gonna do with it? Now I don't know, maybe they were an athlete and they end up in a wheelchair. It's super cliche, but you know, then the story is about how are they overcoming that and how can they still be driven and how are they maybe even more heroic at the end of the story than they were at the beginning. But again, it depends on the story you're telling. That's awesome, Jess. That was helpful, and thanks so much for joining. I know we've talked a lot about story. I'm gonna talk about some more questions about actually really getting like the beginning of the story, because that's the title of my live stream. I could change the title later. That's fine too. But I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that. But story stuff is some of the basics. Like you need to have a story to start your webcomic. So I think this is still helpful. But thanks so much for joining. We're going for an hour. I didn't want to make it super long, so yeah, I'm gonna talk about those. If you still have some questions about story, just go ahead. You're the guys who showed up live, and I do want to answer your questions. So yeah. Oh, that's awesome, Diana. That's so awesome that it helps. Awesome. I love talking about story. Yeah, I actually, for people who are stuck with their story and who even want to start a webcomic, but they really don't have any idea to start, I actually have mentoring programs. It's my premium offer that I will one-on-one mentor you in developing your story, really dive into it, figuring it out, and we could even, if you have a larger budget, we could even go and completely set up your project. So we would do story stuff, but also figure out what your schedule is during your day, what kind of comic you want to make, what kind of style you want to go for, where you want to publish, and all of that stuff. We can discuss all of that. If you're interested in that, go to pencilsandstorage.com/mentorship. I have more information there. I also have a course that's for groups, and that is about making comics. You will make a short comic in a period of 10 weeks, and we will go for a blank page to completely finish short comic. So you will learn the entire comic process over the course of the course, and that is my course, Your Comic Journey, and you can find that on pencilsandstorage.com/yourcomicjourney. Some self-promotion for you. So go to those links. I think I put them all in the description if you want to know more about that. So let's see. I think Anusha might have left, but it's okay. Maybe we'll watch it later. But I really like your story. I hope you will continue it and make your comic. That would be awesome. Let's see. I got some questions under my video about getting started with webcomics, and I wanted to touch on a few of those things. There's some practical questions about what platform should I choose, how long should a page take, and I think my biggest answer to all of those things is, what are the goals for your comic? Is it important to you to gain a big audience? Is it important to you to keep it really simple and fast? Is it important to you to have complete control over everything? So you need your own website. Do you want to make a long comic, a short comic? All of those kinds of questions are things you can ask yourself, because they dictate the amount of work, for example, you're going to put into a page. Like, how long should a page take? There's not a definitive answer for that, because it all depends on how long you want it to take. Especially when doing webcomics, you have you have control over everything you want to do, but it's important to have a clear idea about those things. So how long should a page take? Well, if you have only 5 hours a week to dedicate to a comic, you don't want to make a comic that takes forever to make. Because, you could still do it, but that would mean that it will take very long for your comic to finish. So those are all kinds of questions you can ask yourself of like, how long do I want to make this comic? How long do I want to take with the comic? If you're okay with spending quite a few years on one project, then you can make it as elaborate as you want. I'm totally fine with having one project for a very long time, but I know that some people need that variety. So, if you want that variety, I would actually suggest making short comics, doing a ton of them, experimenting with all kinds of styles, all kinds of stuff. If you make shorter comics, you can make it more elaborate. But if you do something very long, like Recollection City, make it as simple as possible. I've even seen a comic, it's called Miss Abbott and the Doctor on Webtoons. That comic it's super popular. Most of all, it's very entertaining to read. It's a romantic comic. But it's mostly characters in pencil. There's no color. There's no ink. Hardly any shading. Hardly any backgrounds. It's just surprising because the comic is set in a Victorian kind of era. And it's mostly characters in pretty clothing. That's it. Almost no backgrounds. The backgrounds are super simple. This comic is made to account for long episodes on Webtoons that just take enormous amounts of time to produce. For example, another good Webtoon is Space Boy. I keep plugging this because it's my favorite comic on the internet. Maybe even my favorite comic of all time. It's so good. Talking about having a good plot and good character development, having that perfect blend. It's so good. I love that comic so much. Anyway, if you look at the comic style, it's a very simple style, very simply drawn, but also he uses a rough inking brush, and he uses only a few colors, and he just colors the entire comic with only those colors. You see the same in Minna Sundberg's Stand Still, Stay Silent. She has very limited color palettes. And those kinds of choices can really shave off hours of you working on your comic. So make note of how much time you have a week. Make note of how long you want your comic to be. Try and figure out, experiment with styles, keep it as simple as possible, do some test pages, see how long they take you, do some calculations, and then figure out how simple you want to make the publishing process, because it's still the most simple way is just to publish on either Webtoons or one of the social media platforms. There's all kinds of advantages and disadvantages to everything. There's advantages and disadvantages to publishing on Webtoons or WordPress, like I do. There's advantages and disadvantages to Webtoons as well. They all take effort to build an audience on. It might be a little bit easier on things like Webtoons, but it still takes work to build. But if you want, when it comes to publishing, if you want complete freedom and control, WordPress is the way to go. If you want simplicity and ease, definitely go to Webtoons or Tapastic, those kinds of platforms. I see there's a huge lag on my iPad. I hope that's only my iPad though. And I hope this is going well. My computer might actually be, wow. It also says I have skipped frames. 72% of the last 2 minutes. It sounds really bad. I actually don't know how to optimize this at all. So just keep going. I hope it's just because it's streaming live, it will process better later. So that's about how long should things take. And then another tip I have is think in the process. Like, don't think, now I have to make an entire page. That's super complicated and super overwhelming. Take it step by step. First, you need your story written out. Then you need your script, and I have actually a video on scripting. I keep it really simple. Again, like I just mentioned, I have my bullet point. I expand on that bullet point. I'm getting really worried. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because I'm getting so worried about my stream breaking up. I really hope it's not too bad. I might actually have set lower your encoder settings. I'm just gonna go into settings real quick. Also, I'm not gonna draw, guys. I just can't. I can't draw. I can't draw and talk at the same time. I cannot even click things and talk at the same time. So I'm gonna shut down Photoshop. That might help a little. This is my YouTube page. I can close that one. Lower your encoder settings preset. Where is that? Enable performance mode. I think I already did that. I don't know where my encoder settings are. Just on advanced, it sounds very advanced. Stream output. Huh. Well, I don't know how to do this. I hope it's watchable. I really hope it is. If not, I'm very sorry. I apologize. I will figure it out for future reference. Let's just get going. Okay. Yeah, so decide on platform, decide on your style. Dimensions of a page depends on the platform you post on. That's it. Some platforms it's not recommend. I don't recommend posting page formats on there. Examples are Tapastic and Webtoons. Just scroll comics, guys. That's the best, especially in Webtoons. People will complain about that. The audience there can be really vocal about that kind of stuff. So definitely make it a scroll comic, where you can only have one panel at a time come by, or maximum 2, but it's kind of really narrow as well. So it's usually panel. Look at examples of good webtoons that are actually doing this in a really great way. Take inspiration from that. If you post to Instagram, for example, square-ish things are good, but more vertical than horizontal. And then, oh good, it looks like it's picked up again. So happy. I think it was, maybe it was Photoshop. I have an older version of Photoshop, but it's still heavy, I think. But yeah, a square format, make the text big enough so it's easily read on mobile. So you can do the swipe comics on Instagram, for example. It really depends on your platform. Except when you do WordPress, you can do whatever you want. I've seen Scott McCloud do infinite canvas comics even on his own website, which is just, you can click everywhere and go anywhere. Interesting format, but that is something you can do if you have your own website and you can code. Go crazy, I would say. I've seen, it was a baseball webcomic, which I know nothing about, but this guy, was it Ryan Woodward? I think it was Ryan Woodward. brilliant animator. He made a comic that combined animation. He had an app of the ninth, but it's a baseball term, and I have zero idea what that meant, even. Inch of the nine, base of the nine, something of the nine. I don't think it's in the App Store anymore, but it was an app, and it was comic pages, and things would just move, like things would come out of the panels, and the panels would turn into animated things. You can even click, and then it would be an animation. It was so cool. You can do everything if you know how to code and how to do it. Or you can collaborate with people. Obviously, you can do that because I actually called in the services of a friend who is a IT person. He can code. So I did the basics of WordPress because I know the basics of WordPress and I know some CSS and HTML, but he did like most of the stuff that, like, when it comes to putting the boxes in the right places that weren't there in the right places and stuff. So he did all that. I did all of the art and the text and, you know, the basic skeleton. He had to clean up the entire thing. So you know, collaborate with people who know how to do stuff. Yep. We talked a lot about story already. About being overwhelmed. Yeah, just keep it simple. Step by step by step. Think in process, not in page. I just, you know, it's so much easier to just go, I need to thumbnail one page than I need to make an entire comic page. And then it's so much easier to just stop and go as well. Like stopping in the middle of a page when you're doing the entire thing in one go, it's just harder. And you can batch. I love batching. Batching is good. Batching is good for you. And batching means you take one task and do a bunch of pages, and then you do one step of all the pages. So you thumbnail a row of pages. That's one batch. And then you draw those pages. That's one batch. You know, and it can really help get you in a flow of, like, for this week, I'm just drawing. And switching tasks, it takes you out of it, and it makes you, productivity people say it makes you less productive and makes you work slower if you constantly switch tasks, because it takes about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I can't remember numbers, but it takes so long to get back into a task once you've been taken out of it. So batching is the idea. It just helps you stay in the flow of things and helps you to just go, and you don't necessarily, okay, now I've finished thumbnailing, so now I have to put it into a program, and now I have to figure out which brushes I used, and then, you know, you don't have to think so much. So that's good. See if there's any more questions, and then we'll round it up soon. Do you have any tips on drawing from experience but creating a fantasy story? Oh yeah, another question about starting a comic. How do you come up with a story that is original? There are no original stories, I would argue. There's the concept of originality comes from a few things. I think what you personally bring to a story in a comic is a unique combination of your worldview, the stuff that you like and that you've been influenced by, and the stuff that you're passionate about and really want to say. And that combination is super unique, usually. Obviously, we can be inspired by the same things, which why a lot of things can sometimes look the same or be kind of the same story. But that counts for everything. Like Star Wars, the story of Star Wars is not that original. It's basically the standard hero's journey. It really is. But because they set it in space, and they have these really cool, unique designs, that those combinations make it original. When Star Wars came out, it was really original. I know it's been done a lot now, but the Star Wars concept originally, it was very original. And that is why you really want to dive into what makes you tick. What kind of stories do you love? For example, I love stories about journeys, about a lot of character development, friendship, quest kind of stories. That is my jam. That's really my jam. And friendships and relationships, I love that so much. So those are naturally the stories I gravitate towards, and that's the stories I want to tell, because you need, especially if you do a longer webcomic, you need something that you will be entertained by yourself. Don't do stuff because it's popular and you don't actually like doing it. I really advise against that, because you have to draw it so much. You have to spend so much time in that world. Like, don't make a story about bikers if you don't like drawing bikes. Just don't do it. No matter how much you love a bike, if you don't love drawing it, don't make a webcomic about biking. Unless you love drawing bikes and you love biking, then go for it 100%. So, your past experiences, your worldview, and then the stuff that you love, that you're inspired by, like the kinds of stories, but also kinds of art styles. Usually your art style will emerge from multiple influences that you had. So maybe you watched a certain kind of animated show a lot, or you I don't know, I'm spacing out, but you usually have multiple things, so multiple sources, and those all kind of influence your art style. The people you learn from, the kinds of stuff that you're studying, like everything influences your art style. So pick a style that you love to draw in. Pick a style that makes you happy drawing it all the time. And all of those combinations, that will be original and that will be unique to you. And I wouldn't personally worry so much about it. Be a little mindful of certain character designs. Maybe like I had a character in a clothing combination in chapter 1 that in hindsight looked a lot like a certain Disney character. And I had comments about that actually, but it's done. I didn't do it on purpose. But yeah, it sometimes happens. Be a little mindful of like not doing that. But then again, how many long-haired girls with crop tops are there in media? Like a lot. There's a lot of them. But they won't be drawn in your style, so it's fine. And then again, like, for example, Little Mermaid and Brave, like Disney and the Pixar movie, basically the same story. It really, like, so many similarities. But it's completely different because it's set in Scotland, Brave, versus underwater world. Completely different main characters with different characters. But they both have parental issues, rebelling against that certain parent, then going to a witch character, doing something real dumb, and then having to fix that, and in the end, the relationship between them and the parents is fixed. Same story. There's no original stories. But your unique combination of all that stuff that I mentioned will make it unique and will make it original. Drawing from experience or creating a fantasy story. Reference. Definitely reference, because if you can base the fantasy stuff on stuff we know, it will be more believable. And also it really helps you drawing stuff, because now I have to come up with something that doesn't exist. That's overwhelming and complicated. But if you want to draw a dragon, what is a dragon exactly? It's kind of like a dinosaur, lizard, bird thing, bat. But you can even, throw out the bat and throw in something else, and you will have a unique character, dragon character. Like I saw somebody do a mermaid dragon last week, and it looked real cool. Somebody else did a unicorn mermaid thing somewhere. I've seen all of these kinds of weird combinations, but draw from the stuff that's already there and make it kind of weird. That way, combine animals, combine certain things, like just have a microphone. I'm just doing something. I should not be waving my microphone around because I will be influencing the sound. But what does a magical microphone look like? If you need a device in your magical world that speaks to a lot of people at the same time, what is a real thing that does that for us? Is a microphone. What if you made it magical? What would that look like? So try and find some real life equivalent, I would say, and then turn it on its head. Pixar is really good at that stuff. Asking what if questions. What if a house can float in the sky when you put enough balloons on it? Where would it end up? You have up. What if toys were actually alive? What does that look like? What are toys? Like that. Those questions are things they probably ask themselves. Like, what are toys? What are relationships with them? If they were talking to each other, what would their relationship be? But also they really worked with the unique stuff of the certain kind of toys. Get really specific with the things you're designing and with the characters that you're designing. Like, what do you want them to do, and what is magical and fantasy about them? How can I make it kind of weird from a normal situation? What if it suddenly was a completely different world, different situation? Then have your characters adjust your characters to that. I don't know if that last part made much sense, but yep. Guys, we've been going 1.5 hours. I hope the stream wasn't too breaky. I hope it wasn't laggy. If it was, I apologize. If you've watched the entire stream, thanks so much. That's awesome of you. Might not have been too much about super getting started with webcomics, but story is definitely a good starting point, so I still think we did it. Yeah, and leave this video a thumbs up if you liked it. That really helps. It really helps my channel. It really helps to let YouTube know what you want. Also, thank you so much for watching and for being a subscriber. If you are not a subscriber yet, I invite you to subscribe. I post weekly videos about making your own comics. I had super fun doing this live stream. I might do it again. I will definitely do it again next week because I'm kind of on a holiday. So I don't do any business stuff now, so I'm not editing any videos. So I might do a live stream again next week, and I'm going to think of some topic. Yeah, this is super fun, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you have any other questions, you can always, add me on social. You can email me. Subscribe to my email list. You will get an email from me every single week, and you can reply to every single one of them. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, and